Pepsi Vanilla was first released in 2003 in both regular and diet versions. The initial run of Pepsi Vanilla lasted all the way up until 2008, and then it was discontinued. However, it wasn't completely dead, as Diet Pepsi Vanilla lasted up until about 2012. Along the way in 2010, there was a different flavor altogether that came out that was called Pepsi Cherry Vanilla, and this was basically Pepsi Vanilla with added cherry flavor. And this one lasted very off and on up until about 2023 is when it was finally completely discontinued and completely eradicated after very much trial and error. And to give you a visual, this is what the most updated can looks like. If I'm not mistaken, I think the purple stripped one is the real sugar version of this, whereas this is just regular high fructose corn syrup. Along the way, finally, Pepsi Vanilla did come back, but not in its complete form. This time, in 2014, it came back as Pepsi made with real sugar vanilla. And this was initially a limited time release for the summertime. And then it came back out again, and this time it was a permanent release. And Pepsi Vanilla made with real sugar lasted all the way up until 2019, and then it was completely discontinued. Finally, by 2019, the legit actual Pepsi Vanilla finally came back after 11 years. And then later on in 2020, because there was an aluminum shortage, Pepsi couldn't capitalize on the opportunity to mass produce Pepsi Vanilla. Instead, they had to trim back flavors like this to help save on aluminum for their top sellers like Wild Cherry Pepsi and regular Pepsi. And then by about March or April of 2022, there was a new line of Pepsi that came out called Nitro Pepsi, which included regular Pepsi and Pepsi Vanilla flavors on this line. So in all reality, this was basically the new universal Pepsi Vanilla that everybody could get their hands on, and it lasted for a pretty fair amount of time. But by the end of 2022, there was speculation that Pepsi Vanilla, the actual legit stuff, might have been discontinued. But as fate would have it, it started reappearing on the internet, and it was starting to show up in New England states only, like Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. So it was a very clear sign that Pepsi Vanilla was not completely dead. And along the way, when the rebranding was happening with the Pepsi logo, this is what the most updated design of Nitro Pepsi happened to look like. By the beginning of 2024, once Pepsi had basically redesigned their logo, they did the same thing with Pepsi Vanilla. So this was the strongest sign that it was still out there and not completely discontinued and eradicated. But by the beginning of 2025, Nitro Pepsi was discontinued completely. And now, even Pepsi Vanilla is currently discontinued. It just has disappeared everywhere. You can't find sellers anywhere on eBay that are selling it. And I've checked with my aunt that lives in Massachusetts, which is a New England state. Nope, nothing. Joel Nert, he's checked with his relative that lives in Pennsylvania. Nothing. Couldn't find anything on the location app. So, although it's not 100% sure, it's pretty safe to say that Pepsi Vanilla is now completely gone and discontinued. And the reason why Pepsi Vanilla is now discontinued, we don't know exactly, but it's probably because of the new Pepsi Wild Cherry in Cream. And in my honest opinion, this stuff is absolute trash. I absolutely hate this stuff. And I thought that the original Pepsi Cherry Vanilla was way better than this garbage. This is basically the new version of this.